Do comic books need immediate action, immediate saving? Are things on the brink and we've got to interfere right now? Well, yeah, kind of, but not like you think. Hey, this is Perch. I'm all in on call to actions, where basically a call to action is an industry term where it's a moment where we have to act. We cannot sit on our hands. We cannot delay any longer. We have to push ahead and make forward progress. It's the call to action. And comics is long stated that there is a call to action needed for the industry. Now, interestingly enough, to give you a tiny bit of a history lesson here, because I think these things are always important. It's always amazing how history gets forgotten. In the 80s, the newsstand was booming, but comics were shaken a bit off of a pretty bloody late 70s destruction of DC, where you had DC dramatically, after just a couple of years earlier, expand and make a big deal of expanding and really talk about how they were taking on Marvel kind of head on and they were going to be a big presence on the walls. You saw them dramatically shift back. You saw people get laid off, and a lot of people get laid off, and you got titles unceremoniously canceled. You got a back to basics, what Bleeding Cool sometimes calls the meat and potatoes approach, with no kind of sense of history behind it. One of the things I think one of the reasons why Bleeding Cool in particular gets under my skin is that Rich Johnson and some of the others will make comments about the comic industry with very little respect for the 70s and 80s and kind of the people that were there. They claim to, but then they'll make little statements that are like pouring salt in the wounds of people who lived through there, or people who endured some of those hardships. And it's like, what am I doing? I hate that what did I do kind of behavior that often goes on over there. It's disingenuous. Sorry, didn't mean to get off on that track. But the 80s were start off with some growth. Marvel had some good things going on. The distribution centers, the distributors were in a bit of a turf war to some extent, but a turf war is often seen as health. I mean, it depends on your point of view. I think people inside the industry didn't like the distributor turf war, but the fact that there was a turf war to be had was a good sign. And there was a lot of feelings like the 70s, we were kind of turning a corner. We were going to expand up. There was a couple, the Christopher Reeve Superman movie was one of those moments where it felt like comics were going to break through to film, and that was kind of exciting of an idea. And there was just a sense that there was some optimism in the 80s, but that optimism kind of soured toward the end of the decade, where there was a feeling of maybe saturation on the newsstand. There were starting to become rumblings that the distributor wars were going to go into an odd direction, and there was some sudden senses of greediness. Now, I'm by the way, I'm skipping over like things that could be videos all by themselves, just very rapidly. But one of the things that happened, which is kind of misunderstood today, is Jim Shooter was running aspects of Marvel and was running it. People kind of the legend of Jim Shooter has grown over time. It wasn't the kind of army dorm kind of mentality of a rigid discipline and cracking the whip. It wasn't like that, but he wasn't fun to work for either in that sense. And while some people dismiss that of saying, well, yeah, but he kept people in line. Yeah, to some extent, and some he didn't keep in line. But regardless, there was a sense, and I'm not attributing this to Shooter, it was just the era. There was a sense of cheapness that started to kind of creep also into the industry around how kind of people were being paid and kind of and also a feeling of self-satisfaction more on Marvel's side than DC side that started to sour some of the artists coming up. And the artists coming up were also insurgents to some extent. They didn't have necessarily the respect for the older artists. They didn't have we stand on the shoulders of giants. There was a lot of kind of new art, new things happening, taking us into the early 90s, which then boomed out into Image. And art became a big deal. And the lessons that were learned by Marvel and DC in particular was not to let talent kind of ever get bigger than the comic themselves. And over time, that would kind of translate to it's okay to do that for writers, but not necessarily for artists. And then over time, that would translate to how can we squeeze every single penny out of the market here, and how can we, cut costs and do radical things. If you listen to Art Dilbert's accounting of kind of his time at Marvel and aspects of that, the parts that I found most fascinating, that I think most people didn't, because I'm the boring one, I guess, is the talks about kind of how pay structure was going on and how scanning and kind of going to digital blue lines and just other parts of that that part of the business, which is a well-known story. I mean, parts of what he said there were you know un uncontested, in the sense that a lot of people have that same story. The interesting aspect is that Art was talking about it being something they were asking him to do, and kind of made it sound a little bit more personal to him. But I know for a fact they were doing the same play with several others, which doesn't change what he said at all. It kind of underscores the sliminess of the whole time. There was a lot of that kind of behavior. There was kind of an interesting, I want to say, retreat, if you will, or there was a hunkering down into greed. Maybe is a better way to put it, where people were coming out of the '80s, and maybe there was a sense that comics didn't have the same kind of financial boom for everybody, and so there was a scramble on the corporation side to kind of cut costs and take credit for cutting costs and do kind of some slimier things. I think is maybe the best way I would put it. But there was a lot of that in early '90s, and you had Image going on. You had the sense that they're getting rich. Why I'm not? Why am I not getting rich? And so, but I guess my point of recounting all that, and we can go into the 2000s where it got even worse in terms of penny pinching. You had the distribution channel completely implode. You had Diamond kind of take over, and nobody was super thrilled with that, but it was what it was. And then you had Marvel's bankruptcy, and you had the purchase by Disney. You have this roller coaster there. And by the way, if anybody wants to hear full videos on just one sliver of those topics I just rapidly sprinted through, by all means, just let me know what you're interested in. Happy to do that. But the part that I guess was telling, and why I got down that track in the first place, is throughout that era, there would be lots of people saying within the industry, there's a call to action to save the industry. Very common phrase you would have heard through parts of the '80s, absolutely throughout the '90s, beginning, middle, and end in the '90s. You would hear, we need a call to action to save the industry. It's different. Sometimes it's a call to action because the newsstand is gone and the business just imploded, or maybe it's a call to action because Diamond is got us by the neck, or maybe it's a call to action because the artists are getting too big for their britches and we need to go back to what makes comics great again. Whatever it happens to be, there's always been a call to action. And then in about 2016, 2017, for one of the first times, we started to hear a bigger chorus of a fan call to action. Now, why is that interesting? Because historically it was always people within the industry. It was people who were either auxiliary folks who were playing in the journalism side, or maybe it was creators or people within the industry, or maybe it was aspiring people who were coming up. But that chorus had always been going on. And then around 2000, I would say 14 to 16, you saw the creators that kind of quiet down a bit. You still saw noise from the independents, and you saw noise from some of the usual suspects, but Marvel and DC, and in particular Marvel, started to have a much more locked down alignment strategy. And a lot of people said a lot of Marvel people got on social media and lost their minds, but the opposite's kind of true. The social media kind of rollout for a lot of them. I mean, there was certainly plenty of, what Dan Slott did on the CBR boards and some of the Warren Ellis stuff on his boards. I mean, you saw a lot of minds being lost, but you also saw a lot of circling the wagons in terms of the health of the industry. And you saw seeing more of a chorus of a creator would have a new book coming out. And you'd see all the other creators like you're seeing right now for Donny Cates' Thor. It's very classic. Cates sends out hey, if anybody wants to see Thor, hit me up in DMs. It's like, oh, but your DMs aren't open to people except generally people in the industry. Oh, and 2 weeks later we get a bunch of tweets that are getting retweeted about hey, I saw Thor, it was really amazing, what a great book, it's the best book ever. And you see this kind of the circle of comic life, if you will, that goes on. And again, nothing wrong with that. I have, I always respect creators who reach out and when people look at the books. I have a lot more respect for creators that do that when their DMs are open, so that if they're not following somebody, they can still provide stuff. But whatever, it's all good. Um, but suddenly the fans start saying we need a call to action. Right about the time the fans start saying we need a call to action to save the industry, the pros and the creators and the people inside the business started saying, "What are you talking about? That's offensive. There's no call to action needed." So it flipped. It's very weird how that happens. Uh, it's just the comics are no place for people with long memories. I think that is absolutely true uh, on every front, because you can just wait long enough and somebody will say something completely hypocritical to what they were saying five years ago. But anyway, so do comics need? I took a long time to get to the premise. So do comics need saving? Do we need a call to action? Are comics in dire times we need saving? Well, the short answer is a very simple one. Yes, comics need something. They need it really badly. They need you to buy comics. That's it. It really just needs people to go out to the store, put down money, and buy comics. Now, that said, you shouldn't go buy comics you don't like. You shouldn't buy comics you feel bad about buying. You shouldn't go buy comics if the publisher or creator, somebody has super ticked you off in some way. Yeah, don't give that person your money. That's ridiculous. Give somebody. But of all the comics being published every week, there chances are there's a comic out there for you. There's a comic out there that you can respect the people involved. That it's going to be a fun read, and you should go for it. You should put your money down. More importantly, or more to the point, all the people that I see on social media on a regular basis who tell me, it makes me laugh every time I see those creators making the fans mad. Ha ha ha. It'd be better than making you laugh is if it made you go to the store, open up your wallet, and buy a comic book. How about you do that? Because I think, put bluntly, too many people are not paying for the comics. They are stealing the comics. They are then proceeding to go on Twitter and want to chummy up to the creators that they are stealing from. And they are then mocking and laughing and starting fun little Twitter feuds with people to try and make a name for themselves because they saw a handful of jerks on both sides get to 4,000, 5,000, 8,000 followers because Joe Quesada retweeted them, or because Ethan Van Sciver had them on their show, or whatever it happens to be. That's nice, but for the love of God, buy the books. If your number one goal is to quote unquote save comics, protect comics, you love the uncancelable wasp or whatever it happens to be, buy the comic and it won't get canceled. That's simple. Buy it. It does not help. And what's funny is every now and then, I think old Jim Zub's gotten wise to it, is he will every now and then notice that a bunch of the people who are cheering him on, patting him on the back, "Oh, your comic's the greatest, man," are not actually buying the books. There was a famous moment about, I don't know, July, August. Anyway, one of the fans was like, all you haters who are hating on Marvel, this is the best comic over. Look at these amazing scenes. And then they posted some screenshots, from their comic. And it's like, hey, that one screenshot there where it's got the file name on the top and it says, it's got the torrent, the name of the scraper there who ripped the comic. Maybe you want to edit that name out because you blasted that out hoping to get a pat on the back from all your creators, and instead the creators got to see the fact that one of their big allies who's cheering them on was stealing the comic that they were cheering on, and that's not helping the comic avoid cancellation. So is there a call to action? Yeah, the call to action is buy comics. And if you absolutely cannot find any comics that nothing works, absolutely nothing. You've looked at all the indie go-go's, you've looked at the mainstream, you've looked at everything under the sun, and absolutely nothing is what you want. Well, then, just enjoy pro wrestling or modded 80s games or whatever it happens to be that you're into. But we'll kindly step aside and let's get the comic conversation going for the people who are actually trying to do some things here. That's where comics needs help. Where comics doesn't need help is to go and try and petition Disney to fire all their employees. They're not going to do that as a colossal waste of your time. It doesn't need saving from all the alt-right fans. That's a colossal waste of your time. It just needs people buying comics. That's, at the end of the day, that's it. And I would ask that the other thing it probably needs is it needs people to remember the fact that we've been through goods and bads before. We've had ups and downs, we've had hardships, and we've had happy salad days. But it's never been all perfect. It's never been all terrible. We've lived through a lot of crazy crap, and we're going to live through bad things in the future. Absolutely, we will. The industry is going to continue to evolve and change and morph and all the rest. And some of the people who are thumbing their nose at the fans today are going to be the same kind of over the hill, disgruntled jerks that will be posting, they missed the glory days of 2017 and Civil War II in 5 years. Sure, why not? Humility and empathy go a long way. I'm just saying. But yeah, is there a call to action needed? Yes, and that call to action is buy comics. Buy comics. Share what you buy. Love what you buy. Don't buy things you don't like. That simple. Is there more? What do you think? Do you have another call to action to the industry? Do you want me to go into more of those history elements at some point? Happy to do so. Leave me a comment below. Would love to hear what you have to say. Always, always. And like, subscribe, downvote because I dared insult something that you liked. That's cool too. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.